Hi everybody. I'd like to start this video by saying I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but I can read and I can think for myself. And so anything that I say in this video, I encourage you to jump online, talk to a doctor, talk to people that know, because what I'm saying here is actually just common knowledge. And I'm not trying to present anything that is out of the ordinary, but really just clear a few things up so people actually understand what's really going on here, and then they can make their own decisions on where we are at the moment as a country and how that fits into the rest of the world. I wanted to talk about a distinction between coronavirus and COVID-19 because the media does not make this clear at all. We're not explained the relationship, and people don't really understand that there is a difference between coronavirus and COVID-19. For example, HIV is a virus, and people can get HIV, but it doesn't mean that they are going to have AIDS. AIDS is the disease that happens in the body, or can happen in the body once they have contracted HIV. Now, typically what will happen is you will contract a virus, and we have many viruses in our body, but they can remain dormant. And it is when our immune system has a response to that virus that will actually activate the virus into a disease effectively. The immune system is a very complex system. It's not as clear as people make it out to be. But what that basically means is you can have a virus and not have the disease that that virus can cause. What they've found in HIV is that there is actually protocol that can be put in place that effectively calms the immune system down, and it stops the immune response, which means that it doesn't then activate into AIDS. And that's important in the treatment of viruses. However, it's actually the relationship between virus and disease is the same as coronavirus and COVID. So the very word COVID is made up of co for corona, vi for virus, and then d for disease. So when you hear the news and the media, and even doctors say that, for example, Victoria had its worst day with 750 COVID cases, that's actually not accurate, and it's actually not true. If there was 750 COVID cases, all of those people would be manifesting the disease aspect. You would be able to see that they would have the shortness of breath and flu-like symptoms. The reason this distinction is so important is because we're being told that COVID is so deadly that it can stealthily enter into your body and you don't even know you've got it. Well, that's not true. Because if it's entered into your body and there's no reaction, then it's actually the coronavirus and not COVID. And there's actually a process known as Koch's postulates, which actually determines whether or not the disease is caused by the virus. And so there is actually a way of telling whether or not the disease that you have, the shortness of breath or whatever it may be, is actually a consequence of the virus. And we're not doing that with coronavirus. And that's probably for good reason. But my point is that we need to stop calling it COVID. COVID is not something that can stealthily come in undetected, and you can walk around with COVID and you don't know it. It's just not true. You can walk around with coronavirus. Now, that's important because coronaviruses have been around for thousands of years, and they circulate every single year, just as the flu does. Now, that's important to know because we don't freak out when people get the flu, and yet people die from the flu. In fact, you can have, just like coronavirus, you can actually have the flu virus and you don't manifest any symptoms. So the idea that COVID is a stealth carrier is nothing unique. The reality is that coronavirus can be carried with no signs, asymptomatic, because that's what a virus is. It's asymptomatic. And then a disease is the possible product of that virus, exactly the same as the flu. So the flu can also fit into that guise that they're painting out, that it's some kind of stealthy, unknown virus. It's the same with the flu. Many people can catch the flu every year, and they do, and we wouldn't know. And so then they can actually pass the flu on to someone, even though they've shown no symptoms whatsoever. Now, there's an interesting thing when it comes to this aspect of this unknown flu, because it's been painted like this is a mysterious virus, and we're not sure who's got it and who doesn't. But the reality is that's the same for most viruses. And the testing that they're doing makes no sense. They're not testing for antibodies. Now, this is important. Think about this. Let's say you don't have a coronavirus and you never have had a coronavirus, and you get tested, it's going to come out negative. But then you walk outside and you attract COVID right then and there. That test that you just took 5 minutes ago is completely useless. However, if you were to test antibodies and see if your body has already built up an immune response to coronavirus, then you would start to see who's safe and who's not. There's this weird myth going around that if you've had coronavirus, then you're immune to it. And they say, oh, we don't know if that's the case. We do know that's the case. That's standard science. That's why they give you a flu shot, after all. They say if you take the flu shot, it's to protect you from getting the flu because your body's already created an immune response. Well, if they were to test antibodies on coronavirus, what they'd find is that the numbers are much higher for coronavirus than for COVID. And we've seen this in the Stanford University study, which places the lethality of this disease at anywhere from 0.02% to 0.04%, bearing in mind that the flu is typically 1% lethality rate. Now, I'll leave it for you to decide, but it makes me wonder, why will they not do antibody testing, which will only show the spread of the virus as opposed to the spread of COVID, but they're only doing the people that have it now. That's what they're testing for, if you have it now, not if your body's already built up an immune response. What's also interesting is if you look into this disease a little bit deeper, you'll find that a vast majority of people that have supposedly died from COVID had comorbidities. In other words, what that means is 0.9%, less than 1% of deaths that have been attributed to COVID didn't have any other preconditions, such as diabetes or heart failure or any of these other conditions that have been known to be at risk from flus and any other kind of diseases that are out there. But we're not hearing this. We're not being told that in the UK, for example, 90% of COVID deaths are people over the age of 60. We're just being told that it's deadly and it's going to kill you. So let's look at the way that it's been handled. We're told that lockdowns are important and they save lives. But I want us to stop and think about this for a minute. I've been told that lockdowns are for our benefit. They're for our health and our well-being. Well, in Victoria alone, since the lockdowns, there has been more than 400 deaths from suicide during the lockdown period. And yet only 256 deaths from coronavirus. Now, anyone can step back and see that that's not working. Now, that's just suicide. That doesn't account for heart failure, kidney failure, diabetes, and all the other deaths that the lack of medical care due to lockdowns has caused. If it's really about health, and it's really about looking after our health and putting our health before money, then why are we only looking at the now? And what I mean by that is, if we have no economy, we have no health. These lockdowns are destroying our economy, they're destroying our livelihoods, and they're destroying people's mental health. And if you look at countries that have very poor economies and countries that are basically broke, they have no health system. They have no mental health system because they can't afford it. So when we say, oh, we are putting people over money, no, you're not. Because if you're putting people's well-being and health first, you would be looking at investing into the future. And when you're just looking at lives right now only based around coronavirus and not based around all the other types of death, then you're not considering people's well-being at all. And to put this into perspective, this is a bit of a news flash that might be a surprise to people. People have been dying before coronavirus came along. If this is really about health, then tell me why 600 to 1,000 people per year die from alcohol-related disease. 600 to 1,000 people. But isn't it strange that the bottle stores are still open? 5,000 people die from cigarette smoke. And yet we're not banning cigarettes. If this is truly about health, why are we not? In fact, cigarettes are actually a good analogy or a good comparison, because you can choose to not smoke a cigarette and be around someone that does, and it's still detrimental to your health. Now people argue, well, I could go out and someone infects me, I didn't choose to get sick. Well, it's very similar with cigarettes. So let's go with the narrative for a minute. Let's accept that the mainstream media is telling us the truth and that we have effectively stopped the coronavirus from infiltrating New Zealand. We have halted the virus and we've kept it out of New Zealand. Considering that we know that we need to catch a flu in order for our country to be on top of the flu the next year round, that's how immunity works. Considering that, what are we going to do next year when the coronavirus comes round again, which it does every year? Are we going to lock down the country again? Locking down the country right now not only doesn't work to stop the virus, as we've seen across the whole world, but if anything, it puts us at higher risk next year. Not only that, our economy is now in a lower position to actually deal with another strain of coronavirus coming through, which it will. So you may say, well, what's the alternative? What could we have done? It's actually really basic. We know who is at risk of this disease. It's the elderly and it's the people that are immunocompromised. We know that. So the smart thing to do would have been to take in the people in that risk category, place them into quarantine-like facilities, and then allow people the choice to go ahead and live their life as they see fit. See, one of the problems that I face with this whole lockdown and these laws that they've passed, the COVID-19 response bill, is that with the flick of the pen, they've taken away your freedom. According to the Bill of Rights, you have the right to choose who you will mingle with, to freely travel across the land that you live in, to choose when, how, and where to worship. And here's a very important one, you can read it yourself in the Bill of Rights. You have the right to seek employment. and you have the right to be employed. But with no consultation whatsoever, these rights have been taken out from underneath us, and we are now in this position where we have had no choice over our own health, and we are just acquiescing to whatever the government says, whenever they say, and however they say. We have given out literally billions of dollars in support to stop people supposedly from catching this virus. So the alternative would be quarantine those people that are at risk. Inform the public that this is a particularly nasty strain of the virus that we all know. But if you choose to lock down because you're scared that you may die, then we will pay your way with a subsidy. But if you, as a sovereign individual who is intelligent and in control of your own body, chooses to continue to live your life, we will give you that right. And that's how it should have been handled. People are not stupid. And they will, if this were really as deadly as they're trying to paint it out to be, the moment they started to see people around them getting very sick and near death very quickly, they would stop going to work. See, it's not that people are stupid, but I do believe that people are asleep. I literally heard the Prime Minister say that they have tried hard to create an environment of trust in the government. And that could be taken as sinister, or it could be taken as being legitimate. But maybe that's the problem here. Maybe people have believed too much in what the government says rather than their own intelligence, rather than them stopping to seeing what is really going on here. I don't believe that this is a health issue. I believe this is a political issue. And we should have the right to choose whether or not we get sick, and to choose what kind of medical treatment we receive. But these rights have been taken away from us. If you believe that the virus is deadly, and that if you catch it you will die, you have every right on God's green earth to believe that, and I'm not trying to take away your right to believe that at all. But what I do believe is that I should have that same right afforded to me and my family to choose what we wish to do and how we wish to respond to a virus that is out there. So when it comes down to it, this is a sovereignty issue. This is an issue of democracy. If you care for your future and you care for your family's future, you cannot ignore the fact that this idea of locking down and this idea of instilling fear into everybody, and this idea that the government is in control and yet they're giving out money left, right and centre, then you have to stop and say, is this the right thing for our future? Is this the right thing for our children and our children's children? Because it's lovely to hear that there's handouts. It's nice to hear that even though you've lost your job, the government will support you. Let's not forget, that money has to come from somewhere. And when it's all gone, it's all gone. And when it's all gone, there is no healthcare. There is no well-being. There is no mental health service, but rather scrambling just to survive. If you appreciate this message, please like it, please share it and get it out there. I will not be surprised if it gets banned, because these kind of things aren't being spoken about. But if you wish to have your voice heard, and you believe that what I'm saying is complete and utter nonsense, then I hear you and I accept your view, but please afford me the right that I've just afforded to you. God bless.